What are things you see most beginning writers sort of get wrong with writing an outline?
Plot. So many writers think that writing an outline is figuring out their plot. Okay, and there's something very satisfying about coming up with a plot. There's something like, oh, I've got it. But here's the problem, is that, again, Einstein says you can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created the problem. Every story begins with a dramatic problem. And what happens, every writer's had this experience, you get really excited by your premise, and you start writing it, and you get halfway through, and then you get stuck. And then you're trying to make these characters interesting, but you feel like they're just, you know, pieces on a chessboard that you're trying to move around. And so it's important to understand that story structure is not about plotting. Story structure really is the DNA of your protagonist's transformation. And so what you really want to do is you want to start to be curious about your protagonist's dilemma. Because when you really understand the nature of their struggle, the nature of their dilemma, it becomes the source of your story, and it just starts to pay off in silver dollars. It starts to give you all sorts of ideas, images, scenarios that are going to become your plot. Okay, but if you here's what I would suggest. If you want to come up with a great outline, the first thing we do in the 90-day novel, in the 90-day screenplay, is we spend 1 week imagining the world of the story and doing absolutely no outlining. Because what happens is, I would say our idea of our story is never the whole story. If you start to outline your idea of your story, you're going to get stuck. It's going to become kind of a superficial thing. But if you allow yourself to lose yourself in your characters relating to other characters, they're going to surprise you. They're going to be alive, and they're going to start to do things that you might not have imagined had you forced them into a prescribed outline. Okay, and so that's the first step, is imagine the world of your story, allow your characters to be relating to each other in ways without imposing any structure, any outline whatsoever. Now that you've got all of this raw material and you start to see how they're relating, I'll give you an example. You would never, if you're writing It's a Wonderful Life, what does he want? He wants to leave Bedford Falls in order to have a wonderful life. The midpoint of that is where Mr. Potter offers Jimmy Stewart a job. That would never, if you're outlining your story, that has nothing to do with what Jimmy Stewart wants. Okay? Mr. Potter's the devil. Okay, he's the enemy. Why would he ever offer him a job? That wouldn't make any sense. But if you're imagining the world of the story and you come to the midpoint structure question, okay, which is how does your protagonist experience temptation? It might occur to you that the devil would tempt him with a big job offer. Okay, and so that's where I feel like the way I teach story structure is different than, I've been told it's different than everybody. And it's because there's no plotting at all. There's these structure questions that are experiential questions, okay? So we're exploring your protagonist's experience at key stages in the journey. Okay, I hesitate to say the hero's journey because then people get this fixed idea, oh, you're teaching the hero's journey. No, I'm actually not. I'm teaching, what I'm teaching is that story structure is an immutable paradigm for a spiritual transformation, and that there are key stages that one goes through, including the reluctance at the end of the first act, the false hope, which we just talked about. I'm talking about now the midpoint, temptation, and then suffering toward the end of the second act, and then finally surrender at the end of the second act. These are all experiences: reluctance, false hope, temptation, suffering, surrender. They have nothing to do with plotting, and we're not talking about a reversal, so.
As someone already figuring out the ending in that before they're beginning this outline, you said think about it for a week or whatever, think about the crux of the story, what is it really about? Are they also figuring out the ending, or is it revealed sometimes after you do the outline?
Both. It can get revealed after you do the outline. I don't like the word figuring out because I don't think we figure anything out, but I have an exercise that I give my students to to experience the ending. And it's a two-part exercise. I say, imagine your protagonist transformed at the end of the story. How is your protagonist relating differently to other characters at the end of the story? How are they relating differently than they were at the beginning? And what do they understand at the end of the story that they didn't understand at the beginning? Okay, and then do that like every day. Do that for like 10 minutes every day. And what you start to plant a flag for your protagonist at the end of the story. You start to experience your protagonist at the end of the story. Character suggests plot. When you start to experience your character relating differently to these other characters, plot naturally emerges. But you're not figuring anything out. If you try and figure it out, you're going to get stuck. And then the second thing you want to do is you want to imagine if you want to imagine the climax of your story, remember that we want our protagonist to be active through the whole story. You want to have an active protagonist. And the challenge for writers is that we tend to be sort of passive observers. We're always watching what's going on. And so when we sometimes put ourselves into the protagonist situation, sometimes the protagonist can be the least interesting character in the story. And so you want to find a way to make them active. The structure questions are always going to make your protagonist active. At the climax, you want to think about the difficult choice your protagonist makes between what he or she wants and what they need. Okay, it's a difficult choice, so that's an action. I'm making a choice. So your protagonist has to take an action between what they want and what they need. So think in terms of, like, let's say I want justice, but I believe that when I get revenge, justice will be done. So what I want is actually revenge. Okay, I want them to pay, and what I need is to have compassion. Okay, so in other words, the end of the story, the climax of the story is we're going to reframe our relationship to the theme, i.e. justice. And so I'm going to put my protagonist in a situation where he's going to have to make a difficult choice between what he wants, revenge, and what he needs is compassion. In other words, if it's not a difficult choice, he would have made the choice in Act 1. But it has to be difficult. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes we call it the battle scene, the climax of the story, but it doesn't have to be an external battle. It can be an internal battle, okay? So it doesn't have to be, it can be an internal battle that gets dramatized. Like if you think about Holly Hunter in broadcast news, the battle scene is her staring at a plane ticket on a bench at the airport because William Hurt says, here's the ticket, and what she wants is there to be she wants there to be integrity in broadcast journalism. But what she needs is to have integrity. So when William Hurt crosses the line and fakes a tear in this interview, she's furious, and she wants him to take responsibility for it so that she can go off to this exotic island for a week and frolic with him. But he's not going to. And so she is forced to make a difficult choice within herself. Am I going to get on the plane with William Hurt, or am I going to get back in the cab? And so that's the battle scene, but it's still active. She makes the choice of getting into the cab. So you want to find a way for your protagonist to make a difficult choice between what they want, which is always outside of themselves, i.e. William Hurt, and what they need, which is always within. I'm going to do the right thing.